and welcome to the presentation of the ESRC Just Energy project. This is a project that has been running since 2017 and arrives to its end. This project has been focusing on access to justice by energy poor and vulnerable consumers. And this project has been financed by the ESRC and has involved the University of Glasgow and the University of Westminster. The project team involves Dr. Naomi Kratzwald. She's a reader in social legal studies at the University of Westminster. Dr. Chris Gill, a senior lecturer in public law at the University of Glasgow. Myself, I'm Maureen Cornelis. I'm the executive director of Next Energy Consumer. And Dr. Rachel McPherson, who's a lecturer at the University of Glasgow. Our research project has been focusing on access to justice and alternative dispute resolution, on EU law and regulations and their national implementation, on energy poverty and vulnerability in Europe and in those countries, and on local and community support. To give you some background, ADR means Alternative Dispute Resolution, and in Europe it's managed by Directive 2013-11 EU. And ombudsmen are a form of providers of alternative dispute resolution. They are official or organization appointed to investigate individual complaints against a company or an organization. And in the energy sector, the directives on market design mention ombudsmen specifically as ways for consumers to resolve their disputes with their energy suppliers. Our project has been focusing on 5 countries and regions, the UK, France, Italy, Bulgaria, and also Catalonia. Why have we chosen these places? It's because they have different legal, social, geographical, and economic background. As you know, their political and levels of energy poverty are completely different. Their climate is different also, but there are still a lot of similarities when accessing justice by and for vulnerable people. So what we have found is that wherever in Europe, it is difficult for vulnerable consumers to access formal sources of help and alternative dispute resolution. And somehow, alternative dispute resolution could be strengthened to play a bigger access to justice role. It could be here to serve more access to justice. And local actors such as community, third sector or churches, for instance, are quite well placed to help vulnerable people. And we also saw how joining up formal and informal actors would be key to addressing the gaps in access to justice. What we have seen as well is that the energy poverty context is extremely complicated, as energy is way more than a commodity. It's also linked to climate, to housing, to the just transition issues, to health. And overall energy poverty touches upon what's personal, like the comfort of a shelter, and we all experienced that during the current lockdown. In the energy sector, the issue of justice and alternative dispute resolution is, however, progressing at a different pace than that of the most vulnerable or fragile people. So our project wants to investigate how best should we get hold of those who are currently invisible to the system. So we thought about some strategies that I'm going to share with you right now. We saw that ombudsmen could fill up the gaps. They could fill up the gaps because they have different options to help people in vulnerable circumstances. They can offer help and signposting using multiple tools, including the telephone. For instance, in France, there is the Energy Info platform that people can visit and where they can learn about energy consumption, about their rights, etc. There is the option in certain countries, such as the UK, to make complaints via telephone. So the caseworker basically records the complaint, and then it is he or she receives the confirmation from the consumer. Then in certain countries, such as Catalonia or even France or the UK, the ombudsman collaborates directly with anti-poverty organizations, social services, and local workers. There is a direct link between them all. And what is also visible in certain countries, such as Belgium, which was out of our scope, but has very interesting best practices, is that there are some permanent cooperation between other sectoral ombudsmen and also regulators. For instance, if you think about the telecommunication sector and the energy sector, they are often very, very close, but the laws and the regulations that apply are different. So a cooperation between different sectors is absolutely necessary to make sure that people don't get out of the help net. What is also common and would be important to strengthen is the personalized services and follow-up. I mean, alternative dispute resolution providers can offer ways to signpost persons towards the most appropriate services. If they need help, for instance, to deal with debts, they can orient them towards the best provider, or the appropriate provider. And they can also be the one acknowledging the different forms of vulnerability. This is very interesting because, in fact, vulnerability is defined and handled differently from one sector to another. And the criteria to be recognized as vulnerable or in need for help is different from one sector to another. So the ombudsman, by talking to different stakeholders, by talking with their counterparts in different sectors, can actually fill up this kind of gaps. And overall, what is needed is really to simplify the access to fundamental rights and to maximize the automation of those rights. However, alternative dispute resolution bodies may have inherent limits to their roles because they are limited by the regulation in place, by their scope of activity. And for instance, in certain countries, they can't really handle complaints related to maladministration or unfair commercial practices because they are not directly dealing with energy, but they are more dealing with contract law. So what we found is that cooperation among stakeholders is absolutely critical. It supposes a work and a combination of work of many actors, such as NGOs, regulators, advice providers, whoever they are, local community initiatives, churches, doctors, community centers, etc. They need to work together. And even more importantly, the system needs to change to include access to justice as something direct, rather than asking people to take responsibility to assert their rights and defend themselves. Sometimes they are just not aware that they can access for free a form of justice provider. Thank you so much. You can find out more by checking our website, esrcjustenergy.wordpress.com. Contact us via email at the address hereby provided, and also follow us on Twitter at esrcjustenergy on Twitter. We are also releasing a book edited by Hart on access to justice for vulnerable and energy poor consumers called Just Energy. We are very much looking forward to presenting you this book, and so please stay tuned.